Hello and welcome to BrightStreamTV. I'm your host, William Everhart. And today's episode is all about eBooks, and we're going to use Adobe InDesign to create them. So first, we should probably preface this by saying that we have a new chat window, a new chat app there to your right, and you should be able to just click on that and post your questions there. Of course, if you prefer to use the Twitter account, you can certainly do that. So it's hashtag of AskBrightStreamTV. You can post your questions there as well. And we'll take a look at those questions here towards the end of the show and see if we can't get those answered for you. Today's show is going to be a very brief show. It's only going to be about an hour long, maybe a little more than an hour, depending on how fast we get through the content. But this is kind of a preview to how we create eBooks using a product like Adobe InDesign. So let's just dive right into it, and let's take a look at, well, what an epub is and what are the other ebook forms, and then how does InDesign fit into all of this mix? All right, so what we want to cover in this short amount of time is to have a look at the various epub or ebook formats. You know, what is an ebook and what are the different formats that you can use? I want to talk a little bit about setting up an InDesign document for creating ebooks. And then we're going to start looking at some of the interactive content that we can add to an InDesign document. We also want to take a look at image size and positioning, so just some standard elements there from within the InDesign document. Finally, we'll take a look at the HTML and CSS. We'll be very, very brief on that. This is not a programming course or an HTML editing course, so we're going to just be very brief about that. And then we're going to wrap it up by showing you how to publish the ebook format itself. So let's begin by comparing the ebook formats. Now, there's several of them out there. This is just a small sample of them. Most of you are probably familiar with a PDF. It's a very standard form. It's out there. It's omnipresent, if you will. Everybody has seen, used, and created PDFs. And so that is probably one of the more common ebook formats. It is what we call a fixed layout. So what does fixed layout mean? And that's going to be important. We'll talk about that when we get into InDesign itself, but basically a fixed layout just means that what I see inside of my publishing application, be it Word or InDesign or whatever tool you use, when you publish this PDF, it's going to look exactly the same. So it's going to not necessarily scale to fit your screen, your device. So we'll talk a little more about that when we get over into InDesign. DRM, digital rights management, that can be added to a PDF. It's not native inside of a tool like Adobe InDesign. So that is handled on the back end. Of course, PDFs are very easy to publish because they are pretty much everywhere. Everybody's had a chance to create one. There are several tools out there. Most applications have some sort of export to PDF mode, so it's very, very simple to do. From your reader's standpoint, it does require a reader app, and there are several of those out there. Most all of them are free. And it also supports what we call long documents, things like longer books, things that have multiple chapters and maybe several hundred pages. Those are long documents. So that's the PDF. Really easy to create, very commonplace, but it is a fixed layout, so you have to keep that in mind, and that's going to be critical here. The next one is called an epub. epub comes in a different, couple different flavors here. You have a reflowable and a fixed layout. And so let's distinguish the differences here. So the reflowable has a flexible layout. It will scale to adjust to the screen. So it's not scaling the content up or down necessarily. What it does is actually reflows the content. And then things like images and graphics, they will be scaled to fit your screen. But the text itself remains the same size. So this is really, really nice when we have to publish for Oh, maybe for documents that'll be viewed on both a computer and perhaps even a small smartphone screen. So really nice, that flexible layout. EPUBs generally have a limited interactivity level, so you can get things like, well, hyperlinks and maybe a button, but usually it's pretty limited. It can run scripts, but like I said, it's very, very limited as far as the interactive capabilities that you can add into a reflowable EPUB. You have DRM, once again, digital rights management, that can be applied to EPUBs. This is generally handled by whoever your publisher is. So if you use someone like Amazon, they actually have DRM baked right in, and they'll put that on there for you. It also requires a reader app, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. It's getting better out there. I'm going to show you a couple of reader apps for EPUBs. It's getting better, and there's more and more of them out there now. But in the early days, it was kind of tough to find a reader for these EPUBs. And EPUBs also support long documents. There are two different levels of EPUBs as well, and I should mention that. There's a level 2, which is pretty much just for text and just a few pictures, and there's a level 3, which is the latest, and it supports more of these interactive features. Now, the other type of EPUB, now this goes beyond the levels 2 or 3. There is what we call a fixed layout. Now, this type of EPUB is very similar to a PDF in that what you see on your publishing application, in our case is going to be InDesign, however the layout is there, it's going to remain the same when we create this EPUB file. So like I said, and I'm going to keep mentioning that, the fact that it is either a fixed layout or a flexible layout is critical when you are deciding what type of ebook you want to create. Now, fixed layout EPUBs, like I said, they're they're getting the best of both the PDF and the EPUB. They're getting the fixed layout of the PDF, which is really great in certain situations, and yet you also get the higher level of interactivity that, it's even higher than what you would get in a PDF or certainly a standard reflowable PDF, EPUB. So you get a much higher level of interactivity. And so the EPUB fixed layouts are what we're going to be focusing on primarily today. You also have your DRM. It still requires a reader app, and it is also has limited support on devices. So you're going to have mixed support, actually, is probably a better way to say that. So this really depends on the reader app itself as to which of the interactive features it will support. Once again, it's getting better and better, the support for all these various features on a multitude of devices. So as it grows, the fixed layout EPUB is just going to get better and better and be more widely accepted. Now finally, the last type of ebook that we can publish from within a product like Adobe InDesign is a custom application. Now this too is a fixed layout, and it is extremely interactive. This falls back onto Adobe's digital publishing suite, which used to be limited to just InDesign, but now it incorporates a lot of their products. So it's not just limited to InDesign. And so I won't be talking a whole lot about this, but this is a custom app. You have to pay a good bit more for this type of publication, and you are limited in the channels in which you could distribute this. It also has a very complicated publication process, so there's a lot more going on there, and with that higher level of interactivity, there's going to be a higher level of a learning curve for that type of application. So hopefully that gives you a little better understanding of the different types of ebooks that we can create. Now there are other things that we could create that are considered ebooks. The term ebook is just a generic term for an electronic book. Any type of publication, any file type that can be distributed electronically, well, that's considered an ebook. I've just pointed out the most common ones here, the PDF, the EPUB, and then of course the custom app. So What we want to take a look at here in the time that we have is, well, how does all this happen with inside of InDesign? And why would we choose a tool like InDesign to publish our electronic books? Well, the one thing that I can say that InDesign has over a lot of the other publishing tools out there, especially something like Microsoft Word, is the level of interactivity, the amount of things that I can actually easily put into a document. It's really, really quite simple to add things like hyperlinks in movies and cross-references. And then as you'll see, we're going to create some interactive content that is more user-oriented. Things like what we call multi-state objects. Interactions that require the user to maybe tap the screen or click a button and they'll get results. So you could think of this if you are an e-learning professional. You could actually create e-learning content and publish it as an epub rather than having to go through some other channel. Now, there are pros and cons to doing that sort of thing, and we'll see some of those as we go along. So what I want to do is go ahead and just dive into our first project here and take a look at, well, what happens here inside of InDesign, okay? So first and foremost, why do I choose InDesign? Well, as I said, I'm going to have a higher level of interactivity. If you don't need that, then by all means, you can use another tool. But InDesign makes it so easy to add interactive content into your documents, and then the publishing process is really, really simple as well. So let's take a look at what InDesign has to offer when it comes to publishing ebooks. So here I am inside of InDesign, and I've got a simple document here. Now, of course, you can get as complicated as you want with your documents, but just for the sake of time that we have here, I wanted to keep it really, really simple. And I want to point out some of the little quirks that people aren't used to when it comes to publishing, especially things like reflowable content like an epub. So this first little exercise here, I'm going to export this as a PDF, and then I'm going to export it as a reflowable epub, and we're going to see what the difference is. Okay? So I'm going to go up here to my File menu, and I'm going to choose the Export command. There is a save, there is a save as, there's also a PDF presets here that I could use if I'm going to export a PDF, but when I want to add interactivity to a PDF, instead of using this presets, I'm going to use this Export command. So for the rest of this particular course, I'm going to be using this Export command. I'm also going to be using the keyboard shortcut here of Control or Command E. So let's export this as is, and I am just going to drop this here on my desktop. I have a little exercise folder here. I can choose what type of document I want to create here. Now, not all of these are eBooks, okay? But starting here at the top of the list, I wanted to export this as a PDF. Now, there are two different versions of PDF. There's the print version, which basically disables all of the interactive content. Well, that's not what I want. One of the nice things about an ebook is that it is interactive, or at least it can be. So I'm going to choose the PDF interactive here. Next, I'll hit the Save button. And I get a little bit different window here when I'm exporting to an interactive PDF. For the first thing is that at the very top it tells me that I'm exporting an interactive PDF. So it's letting me know right away that this thing, if there's interactive content in here, it's going to be supported. The other options that I have in here, it's really up to you, depending on what type of output and the type of document you've created. You can pick and choose between these options. I'm going to leave it pretty much as is. I'm really not going to do anything here. The forms and media, by default, I am including all of that. Everything else, it's pretty much just up to you for your particular document output. So I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm just going to click the OK. And it's going to give me a warning about this font that I'm using, and I'm okay with that, so I'm going to just tell it, yes, go right ahead. It's going to do that. And then it's going to open it here in Acrobat. And what we can see is that as a PDF, this document, and if I zoom out here so we can see the whole thing, well, it looks, well, pretty much exactly the way it looked over there inside of InDesign. Let me minimize this for a moment. So sure enough, they're pretty much the same. We have the fonts coming over, we have the colors coming over, and the layout is exactly the same. Okay, great. Well, that's what we call fixed layout. Okay, everything is aligned exactly the same in the original document and the publication. So that's why I say this is critical. Fixed layout. Now, the problem with fixed layout is this. What if my screen gets smaller? You see how my document keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller? See that? A little more difficult to read. So imagine this document on my computer. I can read it great. But on my smartphone, where the screen's about this big, not so great. Yes, I can zoom in, but now I'm doing a lot of scrolling, not only vertically, but horizontally. So, fixed layout. It can be a great thing, but it can also be problematic. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, what if we wanted to publish this as an epub? And the first type of epub is going to be a reflowable epub. Okay? Now, this can have level 2 or level 3. This particular document has no interactive features on it, so I could publish this as an epub 2. A little more widely accepted on devices, but little to no interactive features whatsoever. So once again, I am going to use my shortcut here of Control-E, that is the file export command, and I'm just going to change this. I'm just going to do, oh, let's say epub, and we can see here it says epub reflowable. Okay. Now the differences here as far as the epub goes between reflowable and fixed layout, if you don't see that on your particular version of InDesign, it just means that you're using an older version of InDesign. So the latest version has included this separation of the epub types. So I'm going to choose reflowable, and that is the old style. Okay, I'll click Save, and then I'm allowed to choose which version. Okay, so we have a level 2 and then a level 3. Obviously level 3 is the latest, but is maybe not supported on some of the older devices. So if you don't need a high level of interactivity, or you just really don't have any interactive features in it all, you could downgrade it to a level 2, and that's what I'm going to do here. Now, some of the other choices that I have when I'm exporting as an epub, well, they include a cover page. Okay, so I'm going to tell this to be none right now. For my navigation, it builds in a navigation for me because remember, this is an ebook. It is a true book. PDFs would have the same thing, but you have to go a little bit further with those to actually create a navigational TOC for those. The content, it's going to be based on the page layout here. And so this is just the default. You can see that I also have a lot of other choices over here. Okay, so there's lots of options here that I can map out. And we just simply don't have the time to do all of this here. So I'm going to leave the defaults here as is. One of the other things that I have is this little guy right here. It says Viewing Apps. This is one of my options. I have 2 applications that I have set up. I have Sigil set up as my system default, and then I also have Adobe Digital Editions as a secondary. So I'm going to use that secondary. I'm going to disable my system default and just use Adobe Digital Editions. Now, this is that application, that reader app that I was mentioning in the first half here, is that well, we have to have some way to read these documents. Okay, so I'm going to tell this OK. Once again, it's going to give me this warning about this particular font that I'm using. And then it opens this up in Adobe Digital Editions, which is just an EPUB reader. And right away we can see, hey, things are, well, they're just not working out the way I had hoped that they would. So I can see a blue box here, I can see some text here, and then the BrightStreamTV logo, and then the title. So what's the deal? The layout is completely different than what I had inside of InDesign. That's because this is reflowable content. Now here's the great thing about this. Watch what happens when I reduce the screen size of my reader. So I'm going to minimize it here, and I'm going to minimize it here. So this is as small as it'll let me go with it. But notice how my text is still large enough that I can read it. Same thing would happen if I were to open this up on my iPhone. I would still be able to read that text, and it would simply flow the text through the document. It would essentially add quote-unquote pages to the document. Okay? As the user or the reader of this EPUB, I also have options up here at the top where I can change the font size, so I can maybe take it to a smaller font size or a larger one. And it just reflows all of the content in there. Pretty cool. Now the one image that I had in there was this BrightStreamTV logo here, and notice that it put it in the center, the horizontal center of the page. Okay. But if we look back here in my document, it was in the lower left-hand corner. Okay? So let's see if I can explain this phenomenon here of, well, why the title isn't at the beginning and why the picture there is centered rather than left aligned. Okay. So this is one of the more confusing things for learners of InDesign when they're publishing these EPUBs. They just like, well, I've got it laid out this way, but then when I publish it, things just went nuts. Things got reorganized. And that is due to its reflowable nature. So that's what it does. It reflows to fit the device that I'm viewing it on. So what we need to do is just take a little bit deeper look into Adobe InDesign and how is it deciding, well, the blue box comes first, then the text, and then the title. You know, what happened there? What is causing that, and how can we treat it? How can we fix it? So let's dive back into InDesign and see if we can fix our layout here. So the way InDesign looks at a document like this when it goes to publish an EPUB, my choice there, and I'm going to bring this back up for a moment, my choice here was to lay out my content order based on the page layout. Okay? Okay, so it should look exactly like the document, right? Because that's the page layout. Well, not according to InDesign. What InDesign does is it scans the page, and this is critical here. The order in which it scans from left to right first, then top to bottom. So just using my cursor here, I'm going to grab a guide. So think of this guide as the scanner eye of InDesign. When it strikes this document, what's the first thing it hits? The blue box, okay? So it puts that first. The next item or items that it hits is not the title. It's actually the subtitle here and the copy below and the BrightStream logo. So when it strikes multiple items at the same time, then it looks top to bottom. So my subtitle comes next, then the body copy, then the logo. Okay? So why isn't the title in there? Well, let's zoom in. You see the container, the text frame that holds my title, I pushed it over a little bit so that it would indent a little off of that left side there a little bit, to kind of match up with some of the other text that I have here. Well, obviously that is probably a poor choice, but that is why it's doing this. It is, like I said, striking this left edge, seeing these other elements first, then this item. Well, how do I fix that? Well, there's a couple ways to do that. One, I could move the text container here. I could slide this to the left, but then my text is, well, it's aligning to the left, so I would have to put an inset on it. I want this text to be inset a little bit. You might be able to get away with a space. Personally, I like using this feature here. I'm going to go to the Object menu and Text Frame Options. Okay. Inside the Text Frame Options, I have this little feature called Inset Spacing. I'm going to disable the little link here because all I want to do is add some left indent to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag this over here to the right. At the bottom of the Text Frame Options dialog, there's a preview button. I'm going to turn that on because I'm not exactly sure how many pixels off the left edge I want. So with the preview on, every time I update it, well, I get the preview. So I can just kind of pull this in. Looks like close to 9, maybe 10 pixels is going to do it. Looks pretty close, so I'll tell that okay. So it doesn't matter that the text is inset. The frame that it's sitting in is what InDesign is seeing. So what happens now if we publish this? I'm going to replace. I'm going to use the same settings. And this time, well, we get a little closer to what we were expecting. The text is still not inside the blue box. The blue box is something separate, but there's my title, there's my subheading there, and then there's the rest of the document. Pretty cool. So, as I said, when you're creating EPUB, especially the reflowable EPUB, you want to pay attention to where the objects are on your page, because InDesign is going to look at that and decide where those things should be placed in the EPUB. The EPUB is really, if you were to pull it apart, it's really just HTML and CSS. And that's about all I'm going to say about it. I know I listed that there in our topics, but I don't want to get too deep into that because we can really go down the rabbit hole with that. But if you understand HTML and CSS, then you can edit your EPUBs. But that's really what it's doing. And if you know anything about HTML, then you know it is just a list of, well, just items going one after the other. In a website, we can control the positioning of those elements and the look of those elements using CSS. And we can do a little bit of that with the EPUB. But now, what if you're not a web developer? What if you're not into hacking away at HTML and CSS code? Well, that's where InDesign can come in and help you out. You don't have to be a web professional to do this. It's great to have that knowledge. It's great for testing out the different little quirks and things that you'll find, but it's not absolutely necessary. So I see that I have an issue here. I fixed one of the issues, the stacking order of my elements, but now I have another issue. And that is that blue container and then my text. I would like my text to show up on the blue container or within the blue container. So let's see if we can fix that feature. All right, so what I want is my title and my subtitle here to fall inside the blue box. Okay, I'm going to close the little preview here, and let's take a look. So the other thing that InDesign is doing with this is it's saying, okay, well, those are 3 separate elements, so I'm going to put them in order, just like it would be in a web page. Whichever one comes first, well, that's the top of the page, then right below it is the next item, and so on and so forth. So it can't stack these elements on top of each other. They have to have vertical spacing between them. So what we have to do is convince InDesign that these 3 elements, well, they're not 3 elements. They are 1 element. How do we do that? Well, if you worked with any of the Adobe products, then you understand the concept of grouping elements. So I'm going to select the 3 elements here. I've selected the 2 text frames and the blue graphic frame behind it. Now, I want to group these items, okay? So grouping them together inside of InDesign says, hey, these are a collection of individual items. Okay, so that should be enough, but I'll tell you this, it's not. It goes beyond just grouping these elements. So if I were to publish this now, I would get the same results as I did before. The blue box would come first, then the other two text elements. So I have to go a step further. So in this case, I want to be careful with this because, well, I don't want to convert this to an image. I could export that out as a JPEG maybe and then replace it here in the document. But then what if my title changes or my subheading here changes? I won't be able to change that. So instead of trying to place this as an image, we want to convert it to an image, but we want to leave it live so that we can always edit it here inside of InDesign. We're going to use another feature. I'm going to come up here to the top to the object menu. Now, anytime you are publishing content, you might want to take a look at this particular feature. Object Export Options. Okay. In here, you have 3 tabs across the top. So if I'm working for, say, website type of things, I have alt text here. I can also, if I'm going to create a tagged PDF, I can add a tag to it. Okay. And the one I'm interested in here is the epub and HTML. Okay. So you can choose the epub type. Now this is not, hey, is it reflowable? Is it, it's not the actual epub type itself. It's the type of object that it is described in in the epub. So over here I can choose different things. So hey, this is a cover, this is front matter, this is a chapter, different things like this. This is the different parts of a document. And these things come into play when we are working with certain EPUB readers. Now, for my purposes here, I really don't need any of these elements, but these are just additional elements that I could apply to this object. No, I really just want to change this. It says preserve appearance from layout. So it's not exactly the same. The default here is just going to do exactly what we've experienced in the past. It's going to separate the blue background from the text element. So I want to change that. I don't want to use that default method. What I want to use is this. I want to rasterize the container. Now, what does rasterizing mean? For those of you who have ever worked with Photoshop, you may have heard the term raster data or rasterizing a layer. It simply means convert this object into pixels or an image. And that's exactly what this is going to do. But it's not going to do it inside my document. My document will remain live text that I can edit at any time. It's only going to rasterize this content when I publish this to an EPUB or HTML. So that's pretty cool. I get the best of both worlds. I can still edit the text, I can edit the background graphic there any way I see fit within InDesign, but when I publish it, it's going to convert it into an image or rasterize it for me. So let's take a look at what this is going to do to our EPUB. So once again, I'm choosing to rasterize the container. Okay. I can choose what format I want to use for that. I'm going to leave it as a JPEG. The resolution here, I'm going to leave it at 300. If I wanted to control, say, the layout here, I could as well. So if I wanted it to maybe align a certain direction, I could do that. Maybe I want to have it align left always or centered always. Whatever you want to do. If I don't use the custom layout, it's going to use whatever the default is. And in this case, the default will be just fine. So I'm going to leave the custom layout off. Sizing, once again, I can make some different choices here. I can leave it at the default, and then whatever my export options are, that's how it will size it. Or I could set maybe a fixed width and height, a custom width or height, or I can make it relative to the flow or the text size. So lots and lots and lots of options in here. I'm going to leave it at default. That way I can control it on the back end whenever I publish this. So I'm going to click Done. No real change here. And once again, I can come in here, double click, and I can start editing this text. It is still live text. So it doesn't get rasterized until I publish it. So let's publish it. I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut of Control-E. I'm going to replace the existing one. I'm going to keep all the same options here. I'm going to click OK. And now, here's what we get. Our text is inside of the container. Now, depending on your device, if I look at this very carefully, I can see a little bit of the pixelization. Okay, that's the rasterization. It's a little jagged on the edges because this is not live text anymore. Look at the W here. See the little stair steps? So there is a little give and take with this. In this particular case, it's not terrible, but it could be better. It's not as clean as this text in here. The other thing that I miss out on is if I reduce the size of the text, it doesn't necessarily affect the text inside that container. It stays the same size. Okay? If I reduce the size of the container, you see, it only allows it to go so small. So it's still fitting this container in here, this image in here. If I could go a little smaller, it would scale that image down. So you want to be careful of what your choices are with this. But if the layout is a little more important to you for this type of thing, then this is one way to combat that. Okay. So that's just one way to deal with the positioning of elements. And this is still using a reflowable epub. So, why would I choose a reflowable epub? Well, once again, that's because I might want my learners to use it on this device, a smaller device. And if they are viewing it on a smaller device, when it scales that content down, I want them to still be able to read the content very easily. And that's what reflowable content does. The type size stays the same. It just reflows it to fit the screen. Okay. So other things that we could do with this, other ways to combat maybe this or one of the other options is to use what we call, there's a panel in here that is going to control what content gets exported and what does not. So let's take a look at that particular feature. For this, I'm going to jump to another document. So here is basically the same document. I want to talk a little bit about images in here as well. So I've introduced an image along with the text beyond just the little logo at the bottom. And I want to take a look at my publishing options here. So I have some different workspaces in here. So I have digital publishing workspace. I also have interactive for PDF. And what it's doing is just changing all the panels that I have available to me for the type of output here. So, if I'm going to go back to digital publishing here, this is really laid out for the digital publishing suite. We can use most all of this content in here, though, for things like a fixed layout EPUB. Not so much for PDFs or reflowable EPUBs. So you can switch between those panels, but the panel that I'm really interested in is not found in either of those workspaces there. Now once again, these workspaces, for those of you who are new to InDesign, these just bring up different panels. You don't have to use these if you don't want. It's just presets of panels that are available to you. If you don't find the panel that you're looking for, you can always find it underneath the window menu. The window menu houses all of the panels. Doesn't matter what panel it is, they're all here. Doesn't matter what the workspace is. So what I'm looking for is actually found here. Let's see here. If I can find it. They keep moving these things on me too. So if I look here under editorial, I have assignments. These are great when we are working in a larger publishing environment where we have folks who are maybe working remotely and I want to allow them to work on parts of my document and not other parts, so you can assign different levels. So there's one. The other one that I'm looking for, oh my goodness, let me see if I can find it here. Right here. Articles. Okay. So the articles panel allows me to control, well, what gets published, okay? So let's say that I took this image, or this title bar here, and let me just go ahead and shrink it in a little bit like we had before. If I wanted that to show up first in my document, all I have to do is select it and then drag it over here to the articles panel. What it's going to do is going to create what we call an article, okay? And I'm just going to leave the default name of Article 1. Okay? Now, what do I want to have appear next? Well, let's say I want the subtitle to appear next. I'm going to drag it in here, and I want to be very careful where I drag it. I want to make sure that I put it right underneath this previous item. You can see there's a text element here, working with images, that's my title. I'm going to put it right underneath that. Because if I drag down here in the bottom of this panel, this gray area here, it would actually create a new article, and that's not what I want. I want to keep these as part of the same article. Next, I'll grab, let's put the image next. Maybe I want the image to appear next, okay? So I'll drag that. Once again, I'm going to drop it right here underneath the last item, and then I'm going to drag the text, okay? Awesome, and then we'll wrap it up with the BrightStreamTV logo. So I'm just adding content to this articles panel. Now notice that I left out the blue background here. Well, let's see what happens when I publish this to an epub. So I'm going to publish this as an epub, and right here, this content. The order was based on the layout. Don't want that. I want to base it on my articles panel. I'm going to tell this OK. And now it gets published. And it gets published in the proper order. Even though I had moved the title to the right, it wasn't the first thing that InDesign saw when it read left to right. It still put it in the proper order, because instead of using the layout order here, the left to right, top to bottom, it used the articles panel, and it looked at this stacking order over here. So there's my title, my subheading, my picture, and then my content. Pretty cool. So just another way to control the layout. Notice that the little blue box here is also not anywhere to be found. Okay, so that blue background, I left it out in this particular case. If it's not in the articles panel, then it won't be used. Okay, so just another way to deal with it. If you can't afford to move your content around, try using the articles panel. Okay. So just a couple of different ways to combat the layout of your content in a reflowable epub. Now, one of the other things that you're going to come up against when it comes to the epubs is the actual images themselves. So I'm going to publish the same document once again without the articles panel. And let's see what happens to that image. Not the logo at the bottom, the image that's sitting inside the text. There we go. I'm going to change this back to the page layout. Okay. Tell it OK. See what we get. Okay, so it's going to bring up the blue box. There's my title and my subheading there. Great. But what does it do with the image? Okay, where is that image? Okay, so I'm going to scroll over to the next page, which is way over here, I guess. There we go. And in fact, I don't see it at all, and it really should be in here. I've got some little quirky things going on with digital editions. But that image is being left out for some reason. Really what typically happens with these images is that they would be positioned at the, either at the back or the very front of the document. Once again, it's going to rely on that left to right, top to bottom orientation for the stacking order. So when you run into situations like that, and for some crazy whacked out reason my digital editions is not wanting to play fair today, that happens too. what you want to do is definitely publish it to your device. In my case, I've got an iPad over here, so I would publish to that and test it there and just see, okay, so how is it handling those images? As I said, by default, it's going to use that left to right configuration. What I want it to do is I want that image to stay with the text. I don't want all of my images to be put at the very back of my document, which is the typical. So let's see what we can do to fix that. But I have an image here, and I do have text wrap on that image. But like I said, what would happen here when I publish this to an EPUB is that this image should come even after the BrightStream logo. It should come all the way to the end because it's farther left than anything else. Well, I don't want that. I want it to stay right here with this text. So I have to do a couple of things, and these are not uncommon in the world of page layout. And the first thing is that I want to put this image in line with my text. So I'm going to make it an anchored object. So InDesign makes this really, really easy. I select the image, and there's this little small blue handle here in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to drag it, I'm going to click, hold, and drag it, and point it to, let's say, the beginning of this particular paragraph here. And so what it's going to do is it's going to put this in line. It's making it part of that piece of text. The only downside to this is the wrapping here. Now, here on screen, you can see that my first line, in this session I wanted to explore the, and you can see there's some characters behind it. So it doesn't fully support the wrapping on the same line, which is a problem if I were printing this, but let's see what happens when I publish it to an EPUB. Okay. So as you can see, it's staying right in line with the text. It is where the text, the beginning of that chapter is. But, well, wait a minute, it stuck it right here in the center. What if I wanted it to, let's stay over here on the left-hand side and maybe have this text wrap around it? Okay, well, you can do that. So once again, back here inside of InDesign, I just need to modify the settings for this image. Now, we saw this earlier. If I go up to my Object menu, okay, the Object Export Options, okay, I'm going to go over to EPUB and HTML, a little tab there, and I'm going to choose this, the Custom Layout. Okay. So in here, I can say alignment and spacing, or I can say, hey, float it to the left, float it to the right. Okay. I'm going to choose float right in this case. Click Done. And let's see, if I export this, once again, just replacing that content, what I should get now is that image floating to the right of the text, just like I told it to. If I scale it down, you see it still stays in line here. It's floating to the right. It's not cutting off the text is staying away from it. So that's the key. If you have a lot of imagery or graphics within your content, you have to make them anchored frames or inline or above line objects in order for them to stay with the text. Now, once you make those objects either inline or anchored objects, then you can use the output options to decide, okay, float it left, float it right, or just align it left and align it right. Maybe you don't want the text to follow up around the one side. Maybe you want it to have maybe like kind of a jump is a lot of times what we call it, where you have text, then the image by itself, and then more text below it. You can certainly do that. That is the default. But you could also use the float properties here to have the text come up around the image. And it looks a little more natural. So, positioning your images. Very quick, very easy way to do that. Now, what about the logo that was there at the bottom? It's not assigned to the text, and I don't necessarily want it assigned to the text, but maybe I want it to stay to the left-hand side of the page or to the right-hand side of the page. Well, it's the same features. Let's take a look. So once again, I'm going to close out of this, and I'm I'm going to address this little guy here. So in my layout here, I have him kind of laying over to the left, and I'd really like to have it do the same whenever I publish it as an EPUB. By default, it wants to center it on the page. So I don't necessarily have to link this to any text. I don't have to make it an anchored frame. I don't have to anchor it to anything. It can just sit there by itself. What I do need is to go ahead and adjust its object output, export options. And so once again, I'll come over here and I'll choose the EPUB and HTML, and I'll choose the custom layout. So my alignment here, I want to say, hey, make sure you align to the left. I can also include a little extra space before or after if I want to separate it out a little bit. I could certainly do that. Maybe add a few pixels before it. Let's go with 5 here. I can also control the sizing of it. Maybe I want it relative to the text flow or the size. You could certainly do something like that. It would scale the image up or down to fit relative to that particular object. So I'm going to set it relative to the text size. So as my reader increases or decreases the text size, this image should also increase and decrease. I'll click Done, and let's export it once again. Okay. So here it is, and now if I make the text larger or smaller, you see my image is getting larger as well as I increase the size here. So there's a couple of options there for you. And like I said, there is so much here that we can do. We just really don't have the time to do it all. So you can control image position, image size, and then the layout order of your content. Now, all of this I've shown you works for the EPUB output, but there are other outputs. Let's take a look at something that I think you will find a little more interesting if you need a higher level of interactivity, and that is a fixed layout EPUB. Now, this is relatively new in the world here. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time, but it's really just starting to get its feet underneath it now, and people are starting to catch on and see just how powerful it is. So it's up and coming, and it's really great, and I think you'll like it, especially if you need those more robust interactive features. So let's take a look. All right. So in here, I have a lesson 3 document, and I have some interactivity. Now, this one, we have some basic hyperlinks in here. So just text hyperlinks. And these are really, really easy to create. There is a hyperlinks panel over here, and essentially in InDesign, you highlight some text, and you come over here, and you create a new hyperlink out of that text. And your hyperlinks can be well, it can be any number of things. It can be a web address, it could be an email, it can be a file that's sitting on a server somewhere. And so that's what I've done here. I've created 3 different versions here. I have a link to a website, a link to a Dropbox, which will allow you to download a sample file, and then also to be able to send an email to someone. Pretty cool. Those are all hyperlinks, and they're set up over here. Now you can also use a photograph or a graphic as a hyperlink, and so that's what I've done here. I've just got a simple image, and selecting that image would unlock a hyperlink. Okay, so in this case, I think it's actually going to go to once again the BrightStream website here. So you can use images as hyperlinks as well. Okay. Now, if I come on down here a little bit, one of the other interactive objects that you can have in here is a movie. So this is a video that I've placed inside of InDesign. Now, I know it's a video because I can see right up here in the upper left-hand corner this little movie icon. Okay? So let's see what happens if I publish this. Now, to get the movies to work here, I'm going to have to publish it as an EPUB 3. Now, it can be reflowable or fixed, but it has to be EPUB level 3. So let's publish this as is. I'm going to leave it pretty much the defaults here. I just want to make sure that I'm using EPUB level 3. Tell it OK. And so here is my document. Now, once again, I'm going to get those the same problem here with the blue box separating from the title and the subtitle. Not a problem for me here. Here's my image. That's a hyperlink. If I mouse over it, I get the little interactive hand. Same thing with these other hyperlinks here. So if I click on this hyperlink, it opens up the BrightStreamTV page in my browser. Awesome. If I click on this one, the sample files on Dropbox, well, it should open up my default browser and allow me to download those. I also have an email, and I don't have an email client set up on here, but if I were to click that, it should open up my email app and compose the email for me, or at least get it ready. Okay? And then finally, you have the image as well, which clicking on this should take you back to the BrightStream TV page. Okay, now what about the movie? Okay, well, right here. So you can see the movie playing. If I hover away from the controls disappear. We can actually see this movie playing right inside of an EPUB. Now that's pretty awesome. So with the EPUB, in this case that was a reflowable EPUB, you can support additional interactive elements such as the hyperlinks, the movie, and there are other things out there that you can include. JavaScript is one of those. If you needed to run a custom script anytime the user loaded a particular page in the EPUB, that could happen as well. A lot more than what we can get into here. But those are all still just standard EPUB, reflowable EPUB. If you want anything deeper than that, then you really have to move over to the fixed layout EPUB. Now, like I said, this is the new thing that's kind of happening right now because it's kind of like the PDF and the EPUB combined with a little bit of the custom app. So if you don't have the budget to go for the custom app, whether that budget be time restraints or money or both, then consider maybe a reflowable EPUB. So let's take a look at a reflowable EPUB with some really highly interactive elements here, all created right inside of InDesign. All right, so for my last demo here, I wanted to show you this next level of interactivity. If I look over here to the right, all the panels that I have available, and this is within my digital publishing workspace here, I have things like animation and the timing for those animations. I have media, which would be my movies and my audio. And then I have this thing called object states. I have, of course, the hyperlinks. And then I have buttons and forms. So with a standard EPUB, a reflowable EPUB, I can use the hyperlinks and I can use the media. But animation and object states and the buttons, where I can really get into interactive elements, I can't do that with a standard EPUB. It just won't publish. You'll get the graphics, but not the interactivity. So what I've done here is I've created a simple button, and in the buttons and forms panel here, you can select any object and convert it into a button. So if I wanted the BrightStreamTV logo here to be a button, I can select it, come over here to the buttons and forms panel, and there's a small button here at the bottom that will convert this into a button. Then I can tell it what I want it to do. There's various actions here. Some of these are for EPUB only. Some of them are for PDF only. And then these up here at the top, well, they should work in either case. So I might choose something like a go-to URL. Okay? And then I could put in, let's say, the BrightStreamTV.com. And so now if you click on this BrightStream logo, it should take you to the BrightStream page. Pretty awesome. The click me here, kind of the same thing. It's going to a particular area within the BrightStream page. But those are buttons. Okay? If I come on down to the next page, this is where things start to get interesting. Multi-state objects. Now, a multi-state object like I have here, this has a combination of things. There's several items in there that make up this multi-state object. So if I select this and I go to object states, hopefully it'll show it here. It may not because of the way I had to create it, but I had to group it together. But what this is going to do is play a slideshow, okay? So it's user controlled. And then I also have this little guy down here. Now this is going to be a little pop-up here. So hidden underneath this, I also have something extra special for you. So let's just take a look at these interactive features. Now once again, we cannot get these in a PDF or in a standard EPUB. This is only available in a custom app or, in this case, a fixed layout EPUB. So I'm going to export again, but I'm going to change the EPUB type. I'm going to go to a fixed layout EPUB. Okay? I'm going to click Save. And I've got some different options in here. Just slightly different options over here, some conversion settings, different things like this. Pretty much all of this I'm going to leave as is. My viewing app here, I am going to toggle this on. And that is just my digital editions here. I'm going to click OK. Okay. All right. So now you can see that, well, look, my title and my subtitles inside the blue box. So a lot like the PDF. What I saw in InDesign, that's what I'm seeing here. If I click on the button, it should open up something. Let's see here, let's kill that. There we go. And so it's opening up the BrightStream page. In this case, it's looking at the mobile version of it. So this is all within my EPUB. Okay. Pretty cool. All right. Let's try that again. There we go. The BrightStreamTV logo would do the same. You can see as I mouse over it, it would take me to the BrightStream page. If I navigate to the next page, oh, well, check it out here. We got a little animation going on. This is actually just a GIF from Photoshop, an animated GIF that I created inside of Photoshop. And it's pointing us down here to this item, which, oh, look at that. If I click on it, this panel pops open. There is some information in here. And this is just an animation that I created inside of InDesign. Pretty simple. Now the button here is pointing back down, and it is a button. So if I click it, it goes down, and now my button changes and it's pointing back up. So pretty cool. I can use things like animated GIFs, and I can also use built-in animations from inside of InDesign. Now what about this guy up here? This is my multi-state object. With this, I can mouse over the left edge, and there's a button there that appears when I mouse over it, and look what happens. It changes the information, and I get a nice little animation. Pretty cool. There's one on this side as well, so I can navigate through my little slideshow here. Pretty slick. So all of that content was created right here inside of InDesign. And this is maybe one of the reasons why you would choose a product like Adobe InDesign to create your digital ebooks. Now, the only thing that wasn't created inside of InDesign directly was the little arrow bouncing up and down. And that too probably could be created there. It was a little bit easier and quicker to do it inside of a tool like Photoshop. Just create an animated GIF. To create that particular feature. Now there are other tools out there. I didn't want to step outside of InDesign if I could help it, because the focus of this particular course was on InDesign. But there are other tools out there, animation tools. So InDesign comes with several built-in animations. They're great, but if you're looking for something a little more robust, you're going to have to step outside of InDesign, and Adobe makes a tool for that called Adobe Edge. And there is one called Edge Animate. And so you could use the Edge tools to create various interactive elements that then can be placed back inside of InDesign. So I hope that helps you out a little bit with publishing ebooks. Now, like I said, we kind of stuck with InDesign here for this particular one because of the level of interactivity that we can introduce into our ebooks right here within InDesign. The other tools out there, other common tools like the Microsoft Word, they just don't have those features. And so if you have content that's maybe in Word that you would like to convert to an EPUB and maybe add a little more interactivity to it, you can very easily do that with InDesign. InDesign can ingest Microsoft documents very quickly, very easily. It's a very smooth transition. And then you can go in and start modifying your content. It's completely editable. It brings it over just as if it was created inside of InDesign. It's really, really a nice workflow. So there you have it, publishing ebooks with InDesign. And this is really just an introductory course. We'll have some more in-depth studies on some of the features that you saw here, but I just wanted to introduce them to you today to get you started with creating your own EPUBs.